Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about teaching programming and the easy parts. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Fredrik, what do you think is the easy part about teaching programming? And the short answer is the accessibility and the enormous amount of assistance you get in doing so. So let me explain. What I mean by saying that it's easy and it's accessible is because the best part about teaching programming is that once you have explained to a person how to actually use a programming language, they're now actually empowered to do their own learning more or less. They can experiment to the extent that they are able to. They can do whatever they want. There's no limit to what they're able to do. It's much harder if you're dealing with chemistry as an example, where you actually need substances to play around with things and try things out, and it might be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. But in programming, it's actually pretty open. You can do whatever you want. You can teach a person how to do the basics of programming, and then they can go out and just try stuff out, random things. Does this code run? Doesn't it run? They have experiment. They can experiment at a very low cost. It's almost no cost. And that is very, very powerful for the learning process. I will argue to you that the most important thing for any learning process is the ability to have hands-on experience, to try things out, to just play with it. And if you deal with something that requires expensive materials or things that are not that accessible, where you might need someone who's always correcting you or stuff like that, you can't really be left to try things out yourself and then just evaluate whether or not you got it wrong. It's much harder to learn. But if you have a play box or a sandbox where you can just sit and play around with things, you can try to get something on a web page, you can try to compile some code and see if that works, you can add some numbers together, just play around with it. It's like building blocks, just try stuff out. It's the best thing, it's the absolute best thing for learning. It gives you such confidence in your own skills, because you start seeing patterns. You get something wrong 100 times and you see different ways of how you got it wrong, and then you see it go right a few times and you start seeing the pattern. Oh, it goes right when I do this, it goes wrong when I do that. And this repetition, this doing things over and over and over just to see what happens, that process is the best learning process there has ever been. It is the way that all humans learn. It's just the faster that you can iterate on the thing that you're trying to learn, the faster you can experiment, the faster you're actually going to learn. The slower, the more times, the slower you iterate over your knowledge or your adoption of knowledge, the longer it's going to take. So that's what my absolute favorite part of it. The second favorite part is that it's a very easy thing these days to teach programming. Not because programming is easy to learn, but rather because there are so many people contributing to the body of knowledge of programming. There's so much content. I mean, before we had the internet and this became a more accessible profession, it was a much tougher experience, absolutely. Then as I was saying, then the only thing we really had in terms of ease was the thing I was saying, like you could experiment and iterate very quickly. But today, you have so many blog articles, YouTube videos, you have documentation and tons and tons and tons of tooling, tech talks. Like there's so much content around. I mean, honestly, sometimes there's a little bit too much, because now people have another problem, but there's so much choice you don't even know what to pick. Which I think is funny. We went from, it's gone from that we only had a few select things to now having such an explosion of entropy within the ecosystem that now that's the problem. So maybe somebody is at some point going to go and say, hey, you know what, we should simplify everything and go back to our roots. Well, some people are still saying that, and that's the most diehard C programmers, I believe. Maybe the Java people in some way as well. But from my perspective, at the very least, these are the two things that are absolutely easiest about teaching software development. So what I want you to take away from this is that if you're aiming to become a software teacher or like teaching people how to program, at least from my perspective, the easiest things about doing so is that, number one, your students have the ability to experiment as much as you want. My favorite thing, if you want to give someone an exercise or something like that to play around with, is to have you write some unit tests or something like that to assert that something's going to work in a certain way, and then just give them the unit test and then tell them that, oh, if you can implement this function or if you can implement this feature, then you're good. And teach them how to do things, and then let them experiment. Let them try, and then you can use the test as an example to evaluate whether or not they got it right. And if all the tests pass, hey, they got it right. Or they can just sit there and play with things. That's what's so powerful about programming, I think. It allows you to experiment at almost no cost, so you can learn very, very quickly. The second part is that there's so much knowledge out there. There are so many articles and so many videos that can teach you different aspects of programming. And if you as the teacher just take some time and go and look at the stuff that you think is most relevant and recommend that to people, well, you're going to give them a very easy time, and it's going to give you an easy time as well, because you don't have to make all the materials yourself from scratch. You just have to point people in the right direction, and they're going to go through this content because it's already been made for you. It's a very convenient thing, I think, to teach programming to people. Once they get over the first hump of learning the basics and get over the fear and the sensation of being dumb, it's a toy box. It's a literal toy box for anybody who wants to learn. There's so many toys to play with. Have a great day.